Thank you for watching Resource Talks. My name is Antonio, and today we're talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly of AI in mineral exploration. Luckily for you, though, I won't be the one doing much of the talking, as I'm going to be joined by the CEO and the CTO at Vrify AI, respectively. That's Steve De Jong and Jean-Philippe Paymont. Am I saying that right, by the way, Paymont?
Yeah, that's it.
It's well, I practiced in the mirror this morning before starting the recording, so that's why I'm doing it. But your last name essentially means payment in French, right?
It does. Yeah, exactly.
It's very fitting
It
because
actually has AI in it. It actually has AI in it
As
as
well.
well, which someone pointed out recently.
payment and AI, and then Steve, your last name is Dutch, and it's just the Young. It's just Steve the Young, essentially. I always laugh when I listen to people call you the Jong or something like that because you're supposed to. I normally speak Dutch in my daily life, so you're supposed to pronounce it the Young. But anyways, very fitting to the topic of discussion today, actually, and I appreciate you taking the time to chat to me. So, before we get into it, though, I would like to warn you that we have not received monetary compensation for the production of this video from the company that's being interviewed. Please understand that this channel is a business that sells content producing services to companies, which means you cannot rely on this video for research, and you should treat this as an advertisement instead. Research is conducted by reading the company's official filings, which you can find on setterplus.ca. Please only watch this if you know what you're doing. This interview is intended only for experienced junior mining speculators because mineral exploration, development, and mining is a very tough business where failure is the norm. This is going to be a conversation that is general and impersonal in nature, containing forward-looking statements. I am not a licensed financial advisor, so before continuing on, please talk to an investment advisor with a good long-term track record because your capital is at risk, and I am neither a licensed financial advisor nor do I have a good long-term track record. If you're not 100% sure you understand 100% of the disclaimers I just showed you and told you about, please go to the last section of this video and do not consume this content unless you fully understand and agree with everything said therein. That all said, I'll try not to waste too much or any more of your time. So let's maybe kick it off with the why, as in, why should I care about AI within mineral exploration specifically, where even I guess the geos with RI, real intelligence, struggle to make sense of what's happening sometimes. So why AI?
I think there's different reasons for sure. One thing that we're seeing is, as you pointed out, like it's hard to make sense of what's happening. Geology is sort of an investigative science where you see the results and you're trying to deduct what happened to lead a deposit to form there or to have that certain amount of deformation somewhere or something like that, right? So the interesting thing is we have to look at some information and make some deductions. However, we're stuck at two or three dimensions as a human. So if you're looking at two or three layers of information, you're trying to overlay them and then try to derive correlations between those data sets to what you're observing. Um, that's sort of your normal job as a geo. However, the fact that using AI allows you to feed in 50 or 60 layers of information and still derive that information is really sort of, for me, the big kicker, right? So it's not necessarily replacing what you're doing, but just allowing you to see through a lot more data really quickly. So you don't have to work for 3 years trying to do a really complicated interpretation of all of that data to sort of extract your biased sort of view of things, where you're getting sort of a data-driven summary of what's going on in your data set that helps you sort of make some deduction onto why there's a deposit there.
Hmm.
And
Steve,
I'd say the only thing I'd add to that is I think JP as a geo comes across or comes at it a little bit differently. I'd say more simplistically from my side, it's almost like why not in some ways? Like you look at our entire industry as a whole, like discovery rates are abysmal. They always have been. And that's the nature of it's a high risk, high reward industry. That's not so much a criticism. But then you also layer on top of that how difficult it's been to raise capital and how important raising capital and financing drill programs and exploration programs is. And kind of if you look at AI, first off, can it improve discovery rates? Second off, which is, I would say, closely tied to the first, is can it help us kind of finance the exploration programs? And whether it's by kind of getting existing investors more excited because discovery rates and the chance of success are higher. It's getting new investors who now look at the industry as, well, I don't really understand geology, but I understand technology, so maybe I'll actually take a look at this sector. If AI helps solve any one of those problems slightly, I think it's all a it's a big miss to not kind of explore the opportunity. And that's kind of how we look at it. Like that we couldn't get much worse, and AI is not going to kind of it's not going to make expiration rates go down or expiration kind of the chance of success go down. So why wouldn't we explore this? And through that exercise, I think is yeah, we're starting to unlock, I would say, tremendous value in sort of the ability and what AI can do, or we're starting to see that value. But I honestly think the same in not just mining and mineral exploration in every sector. We're in the like 3 steps into the first inning of kind of the impact of what this technology is going to do across every sector.
Well, to translate that to Gen Z, it's the mineral exploration was so over that the only thing that AI could do is bring it so back. But I think it's not the first thing. It's not the only thing either trying to solve that shortfall of discoveries either, right? I mean, the biggest argument I hear against AI in mineral exploration is it really is somewhat of a straw man argument, but it's often compared to other things that we've seen pass through mineral exploration, some of which not at all comparable, but people still compare it. So blockchain and to other stuff like as far as helium and hydrogen, graphene into asteroid mining and carbon credits and whatnot. The conclusion is often kind of the same. It'll come and it'll go. It won't replace geologists, or it won't take away from the good teams doing real work on the ground. How do you argue against AI just being a passing fad in mineral exploration, essentially?
Yeah, I think it's yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead,
You want
JP.
to go?
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Yeah, it's sort of different to whatever you've said, but I understand it's sort of a trend. It's been used as a buzzword a lot in the industry as well over the last. I've been at it for about 10 years now, applying AI or machine learning to different solutions in the industry. And I often look at peers or people that are claiming to do AI, and it's often used to sort of either gain traction on the market, boost stock, or anything like that, right? So I think being serious about it just does make a difference, and that's something that we've been really sort of adamant about, is the fact that it needs to be rooted in real geoscience and actually be a tool that people can use, and put in the hand of the user. So again, it's sort of a tool that geologists now can use as opposed as a buzzword or just something that you pay a consultant to do and they give you a result and you don't really understand how that happened to your data, what happened to your data and how it came to be. So I think like rooting it in the end of the sort of putting in the end of the user and rooting it in like pure geoscience will make a difference in terms of like having it be a trendy word, pass along, or really get adopted by the industry.
And I would separate the two things as, is this going to replace geologists, and is this just a buzz, or is this just a trend or a flash in the pan? I think those are two different things. I think that we could spend a lot of time on the discussion around whether or not this technology is going to replace geologists or not. To the second part, to the buzz part of it, I think if you look at past trends like blockchain or carbon credits or other things that you mentioned, you're not looking at a fundamental change in how minerals are discovered. You're looking at something that could be applied to an industry and maybe kind of give it some angle that investors find make the industry more attractive. But you're not fundamentally changing discovery rates by putting minerals on blockchain or adding blockchain to your business or things like that. Like we're very much, JP and I are very much drinking the Kool-Aid of AI, but a lot of it is fundamentally when you look at the science behind it, we, as an example, take a data set, remove 20% of the drill data from it, use our modeling algorithms, go through our exercise, create all of our generative data, and then we make a prediction, and then we reinsert that drill data and see how well the prediction worked. It's no different than kind of drilling a new AI target blind. And fundamentally, we can say, hand over heart, the science works. It's the predictive abilities of AI work. And it's a tool that has not existed in the industry before. And once you kind of see this, and we've gone through this process where in a weird way, when a company's really excited about AI, it's actually in some ways it tends to be more because of the almost the they can see the scientific side of it, but it's almost the marketing side gets them really excited, where it's the real skeptic that says, you know what, I'm just going to give this a chance. And I don't really think AI has an application. I haven't seen a lot of success with it. That's the company that it turns into the champion of what we do because they come in as a skeptic and then they can see sort of here is a blind test showing how well it works. So fundamentally, kind of to the comment on whether or not this is a passing trend or not, I think that's you could take that out of mixed mineral exploration and say, is AI just a passing trend in the world in general, or is it fundamentally changing kind of the world that we live in? We believe it's AI is here to stay and it's changing everything. But what digging into the specific problem of can AI help me find minerals better than I am finding today, there is 100% quantifiable proof that it works. So whether it's sort of what's gonna happen is AI is gonna be really exciting, and then other times we're gonna see, to JP's example, we're gonna see kind of, I would say, applications that don't work or don't apply, or maybe it was much more of a buzz, and that's gonna kill everyone's appetite for AI for a while. That trend will continue. Fundamentally, the science is there and it works. And kind of this is coming from people who are kind of dealing with it every single day.
You're bringing up important topics here to cover, and we'll definitely get to it. I'd also like to see an example of when and how it worked. I think you can show me that by also showing me how DORA is going to work, the new thing that you guys are developing. But what it's so, but in conclusion, it's not like 10 years from now, I'll have to interview AI models instead of interviewing geologists. Like you don't think AI is fully going to replace geologists?
No, never. I don't think so. It's just a tool set that allows you to be more productive or just to see through more data, essentially.
And we had two geologists on staff a year and a half ago, and we have 15 now and 10 job openings. So I think it's a good example of kind of if companies embrace AI and they're using it right, like we need a lot more geologists than we have today. And fundamentally, I think the role of the geologist is going to change, and the geologist that knows how to leverage AI is going to know how to use all of their technical insight and experience, and then kind of supercharge that with the insight that's given from AI. But ultimately, I think you need a lot more geologists than we have today, especially if you find yourself in a scenario where there's a lot more exploration money flowing into the space because of the potential that AI is unlocking. And so I have not seen an example yet of AI did all my work and now I don't need a geologist. And maybe at some point you can just upload your data to ChatGPT and it does all the work. But I'd say you're sort of at least 5 to 10 years away from kind of getting to that point.
That's a good point, and you're making me think about culture fit as well, which is also something I'll write down so we can get to it later. But if it's been 10 years and I still have no idea what I'm doing in junior mining, I might be the one replaced by AI. So maybe I should worry about that first. But here's to your point, Steve, though, of ChatGPT. Here's something that I found using ChatGPT and Grok, for example, is that you can kind of push it and it'll tell you what you want to hear, essentially. So like if I put the drill data from a project and I ask something like, hey, is this good? It'll give me some, oftentimes it's kind of a moderate in the middle answer. But if I then come up with even the lousiest argument about why it might be good and say like, no, this is good, you should understand, then it almost starts agreeing with me. And that's just eroding my trust in AI from kind of the scientific perspective, if that makes sense. So is that something you have to deal with on your models?
Not on our models, just because it's not the same type of predictions we're trying to do, as ChatGPT is trained to predict the end of your sentences, which led to like that whole, it's just a glorified chatbot. So it's really hard to argue it because it's going to take your feedback and sort of make sure that you're sort of in tune with it, or that you'll keep asking it prompts. So it never like rarely argues with you. I've tried a lot, and yeah, as you mentioned, it just falls back into like being sort of agreeative to what you're saying. The model, the way we're doing our training is a bit more supervised, less sort of black boxy as well. So it's hard to really push it to give you answers that aren't part of the data that you're looking at. But also we're also producing with every prediction, we're producing metrics like the accuracy and what are the feature importance in making that prediction. which you don't get as like when you interrogate ChatGPT or Claude or anything else. You're not seeing what's the accuracy on the response they're getting you. You could expose that if you wanted, actually, and it's be interesting to see. But yeah, so we do produce these things that'll sort of help the user understand what comes into the prediction, but also if they're going off track or trying to produce something that doesn't make sense, a geologist could spot it really quickly as well. Yeah.
You will see just to level set, the AI technology that we're referring to is it's a cloud-based interface that the technical team can use themselves. So our role in the process is to guide technical teams. We'll generate targets, we'll work with them, use our own technical experience, but we're essentially handing over the keys so that they can do it themselves. And in doing so, you do bring up a good point though, because say that you run your AI model with every single piece of data you have, and it shows you a predictive map and it's got some big glowing targets here and here. Then you try running it with just your geochemistry or just your geophysics, just to see what the difference is. And you're trying to determine kind of what is the influence of the geochemistry on this, or what is the influence of the geophysics as we do it. And you do one of those things and the targets get way bigger if you do one of them for whatever one there is. So there is a way when you kind of hand the keys over, there are ways to kind of make things appear bigger and so on. But to JP's point, it's why it's so important that we create this in not a black box scenario. So both the person controlling it, but also the person being it presented to is able to see, well, what data was included and why and excluded and why was it excluded and so on. And that's like right now, kind of the state of AI in the sector is kind of like equivalent to ChatGPT. You phone it once a month and 2 weeks later you get a kind of an answer and that's it. And you don't really know what's going on. And what we need to get to, and our whole business is pushing towards, it's that iterative process. And you described it the same, like through this, it's almost like a conversation you're having with AI that will get to the end result. We just have to make sure it's not just done in a way that just gets you to the result that you wanted to see, versus sometimes you're going to see things you don't want to see, like there's not a lot of mineral potential in this area or over here. And to us, it's why it's so important to educate the entire market, not just the company using it, on how to interpret these results and how to look at these results. Because if everybody understands how it works, then they can ask sophisticated questions. And then what you end up with is a bit of a self-regulating environment where both the investor and the company are having sophisticated discussions, and you can't just tweak a model in a way that's going to give you the biggest, shiniest blob.
So there's no way for me to upload a photo of my project and get an anime mock-up of it with with your model. That's not going to work.
You could probably try. You might have to hand draw the data that you put into it first.
That is that's actually and when you talk about the conversation, having a conversation with AI, when I put some mathematical equations or whatever it might be in ChatGPT and it gives me a wrong answer, oftentimes actually I find that it's not too good with math, and you push it and you're like, nope, that's not the answer, figure it out or try again. It oftentimes has this circular thinking where it just go back to the same thing again. Whereas I think, and that, well, I don't think I should actually ask you, but is that the case with you? Like if you put in the data and essentially it tells you, go drill there, you say it's not there. Is it going to come up with something new? And is having missed that target, is that going to help improve the model? Meaning the more we miss, the better a model is going to get. Is that a thing?
Yeah, for sure. So the model is trained to make a binary prediction. So it's like let's say like the 8 ball you used to shake as a kid that would tell you yes or no. It's that, but using AI essentially, right? So it's a yes or no thing. So it's a binary input. What we're training it on is basically mineralized and non-mineralized intercepts as part of your drilling. So one thing that's interesting is, feeding it negative example of like misses where you thought there might be something is really, really important, because it's going to sort of self-train on that and sort of improve on that as well. So you're improving your negative prediction accuracy as well as your positive prediction accuracy. And that's something we sort of have to juggle with when we train the models. So like as you basically explore, you can re-ask the question and rerun the predictions for where you're supposed to be sort of exploring next. You wouldn't get a totally different answer, but basically it just refines the shape of the targets, or it would remove an area that was sort of, let's say it was low probability and you decided to go anyway, and there's nothing there. By reintroducing those negative points, it would actually sort of remove or lower the probability even more of that area and maybe just focus on another area.
Right.
And one of the outputs of this is if you look at how exploration takes place today, it's here's my mineral system, here's my technical team and all of our experience have decided this area is high potential. Kind of here we'll plot some drill holes and then we'll maybe adjust slightly as we get results and see things in the field and so on. But it's a bit of a slow moving process, right? Like this is our 3-month exploration plan, where when you're able to take a drill hole and even if you don't even have the assays, you can visually just see this is good, it's in a mineralized zone, and you can just manually mark it as yes. Like that's a positive learning point, and no, this is a negative learning point because I can just tell it's not in the right space. You could plug that in. The way the platform works, you're rerunning an AI model in about 20 to 30 minutes. So you have this living, breathing exploration model where you get a big miss in an area, and it's not just, oh, maybe I don't drill the hole beside it that I was planning. That'll fundamentally kind of work its way through the entire exploration model, and it could be a super valuable negative point that's really going to make you rethink about where you're going to put the next drill hole or the next 3 or 4 drill holes. And it's that real-time exploration process that I think is super valuable to the industry as a whole, especially in a capital constrained state where every dollar matters, every drill hole matters. I'd like to know as an investor, like what have you done to ensure that you are getting the absolute most bang for the buck for every single meter that you put into the ground?
Hmm. Well, and the same for AI though. Like, as an investor, I would want to know: is the money you're putting in AI really worth it for you? And at the end of 2023, Steve, you wrote an article on LinkedIn with some predictions for 2024, where you said that companies will be rewarded for showing an AI strategy in the first place because that's what their investors want or will want. But how do I, as an investor, when how do I know when using AI is genuinely helping the company find more, or find a discovery, or find more discoveries, or grow the discovery, instead of just helping them tell me what I want to hear? Like, what are maybe signs, I guess is what I'm asking here. What are the signs of a company that is actually adding value by using AI versus one that's only using it as a promo tool?
Yeah, I would say the obvious answer is if the share price goes up, but the problem is a company that effectively uses AI and a company that uses AI as a promo tool, you might have the same outcome, which is a share price that goes up,
Hmm.
right? So it's not it's which is no different than any other, like there's a perfect balance somewhere in using kind of being promotional or being good at marketing and using technical tools that have fundamentally changed or better your chances of making a discovery. So it's like there's always a negative context around promoting and promotion and so on, but having been the CEO of a public company, it's a big part of your role is consistently kind of out there trying to market your company and get investors excited and so on. So I don't think it's really either or. Like I think the companies that are most effectively in integrating AI into their workflows and into their companies are actually the best that are externally talking about it as well. Um, I think it really comes back to the fundamental, like when you get into it with these companies and ask them, how are you using AI? How has it changed your program? What is the potential you're seeing? How does that differ from what you saw before? You can really quickly understand of whether or not it's actually, well, we just put AI as sort of a couple slides in our PowerPoint and kind of add it to every press release, or if it's fundamentally like they're seeing real value in it. And I think it's a really good question. I think that's probably in a current state, the best way is to ask the right questions to the companies to understand. I think what you're going to see is, and like the cynical side of us, we can't help ourselves. We see AI being used in press releases all the time. So we kind of dig into it and you kind of look at it and pretty quickly, there's some good technologies out there and there's some that are just complete fluff. And you naturally, and maybe it's just our own ego associated with kind of building an AI company ourselves. I think we know a lot more about the sector, and we still have trouble sometimes kind of digging in and understanding, like, did you think AI fundamentally led to that drill hole that they did, or do you think it's just kind of they use ChatGPT to write the press release, and now it's an AI target.
Hmm.
And yeah, I know I guess I'm not really giving you an answer because I don't know, but I think it's by asking the right questions is how we fundamentally change. But what you're going to see is if, and again, we are big believers it's going to change the sector. If you start to see a series of AI discoveries, and which we are big believers are going to happen this year, now that a lot of these targets are going to get drilled, you will guarantee you will see sort of everyone jump on the AI bandwagon. And whether they're actually using AI or not, is going to ultimately be up to the investor to kind of figure out. And that's when we look at it, we want to associate our brand with the companies that have not just using AI for the sake of being able to say they're using AI, but are fundamentally integrating it into their workflow and can show real, tangible, quantifiable results about the impact of that AI is having on their business.
Asking the right questions is something I spend most of my time thinking about, because I think I must have done 300 interviews actually since I started interviewing CEOs. So I've spoken to a lot of these guys, and I'm starting to see a pattern where I would ask something and they would find a way to answer it in a non-answer way, and it doesn't really give you much.
I think I may have just done that.
Not well, no, I think you've answered it by saying you got to ask the right questions. And I'm thinking, what are the right questions? Because if I ask them, hey, is AI helping you? Well, everyone's going to say, sure, it's helping me, but how can I probe into actually having that? What's like, what will you
But the
ask?
beautiful part about AI, it's very level setting because like if right now anybody has the opportunity to jump into some super technical geology that immediately, for me, I've spent 20 years in the sector, it's still I'll get confused pretty quickly. I don't have a technical background. And AI is a bit of a level setter because we all have a minimum kind of understanding of AI and how it can be applied. And we all have sort of our own interactions and how, whether we use ChatGPT or it changes how we write emails, or there's something in our lives that AI is impacting right now. And I think you'd be surprised if you start getting into it with companies. You don't need to have you no longer need to have a geological or technical background to be able to have an intelligent conversation with a company about how they're getting the most out of AI. So because of that baseline understanding that we all now have. So I think it's actually really opening up the sector because if my guess is you're going to be able to tell within the first 30 seconds if how they're using AI is actually fundamentally kind of changing their business, or if it's just we like to see how many times we can fit AI and machine learning into a press release.
Do you have any clients who do that, who kind of want to work with you, get associated with you, not so much because they actually care about finding a discovery, but just because they want to kind of stick that Vrify logo and be like, oh, we work with Vrify, you should trust us? Is that like, I suppose it does happen, but how do you work against it
We
as a company?
well, sorry, I want to make sure I don't approach that from that's a negative thing. So we have lots of clients to do that, but we really push our brand to be that, so that clients want to do that. So we want to have our brand and Verify be like, I want to work with Verify because of the reputation and the science behind it, and the market has confidence in that. That's where, so yes, we do, but I don't think it's a negative thing that they want to do that. We work hard to achieve that level of brand distinction and recognition. For us, it's really ensuring that we're not that it's never abused, that we're kind of we work, and it's why we're JP and his team we're building such a deep technical team to ensure that we're able to deliver to these clients something that's fundamentally they can actually brag about because it's rooted in deep geoscience and artificial intelligence.
Hmm. Uh, I'm an accountant by education, so I like putting stuff into boxes. And this is actually a question that I had. Like, what are you? As in, would you classify yourself as being the business in the business of improving exploration outcomes, or is it improving business operations? Is Verify a communications platform, or is it a discovery engine, or is it both?
Yeah, it's a question we've been asking ourselves quite a lot over the last year, I would say. It's not, and I think the answer we have now is that we can't fit into an exact box, right? So we do a lot of things that could be considered sort of a SaaS solution. So we do offer access to a web app to people to run models themselves. But we also have a pretty strong embedding into their technical teams via our sort of experts. So then it's more of a consulting service, but also the visualization side of the business as well, where we're communicating those results with the public is really, really important.
Mhm.
So it's sort of everything mishmashed together. Ultimately, I think one thing that we're really trying to do is be the driver of a fundamental change in the industry onto how people work and how people go about exploring and how they go about raising capital around exploration. So that's one of our big drivers, more than just being either like a software company or a consulting company.
Mm.
And it's really their, yeah, that's the three legs to the stool. And yeah, JP and I and our team have spent a ton of time trying to figure out exactly what this is. And like from a marketing perspective, what do you put on your website? Do you want it to come across this way or this way? The three legs to the stool are sort of rooted in AI first. And it's a software company in that sense. It's software that we take your data, upload it, and then you can do a series of targeting exercises on. Number two, there's a massive education shift that needs to take place, even if you're the best geologist in the world, to understand how to apply kind of your knowledge to marry that with AI in the platform. So you end up like doing a lot of training and then working with our expertise. And then you end up with junior companies that only have one geo on staff. So if you're able to bring a copper porphyry expert or a geophysicist or a structural expert into the conversation, it's not always about the AI results. It's just helping them kind of look at their own data differently. And then the third part is this is all a waste of time if you can't visualize it and communicate it properly. Sort of you have the best AI targets in the world that nobody knows about and you can't raise money for. We haven't actually helped you solve any problems. So it's kind of going back to Vrify's core business for the last 7 years, which has been much more on the data visualization side. It's kind of all of those three things together um, is how we fundamentally think that we can change how exploration takes place today.
Mm. Well, you being a tech company and all, I actually kind of expected for you to tell me that you're going to make the world a better place and empower the next generation. Because these things often get thrown around, but it is essentially what you're trying to do here, or kind of the conclusion that I'm getting to. And I've also noticed in my brief experience as a junior mining speculator that we like collective thinking as an industry. Like we kind of feel very safe in the herd, where if I'm, let's say, an IR person for a junior and I have to make a PowerPoint presentation, I'll just look around peers and whatnot and basically do the exact same thing instead of going out and trying new things and putting the word risk back into risk capital. But so my question here with AI specifically is, say that it does take off and everyone's using it, and how do we as an industry guard against self-reinforcing hype where everyone's pretending that the emperor's got clothes on, right? Where the emperor is AI in this case.
I've got my thought. JP, you want to?
Go ahead.
So I think it's again AI hype for if it works as well as we believe it works from what we've seen is not a bad thing. It's sort of, but anytime there's hype about anything, you're going to have again your promoters pile on and so on. But I don't think the answer to that is like over-regulating it or changing it. I think ultimately what it's honestly going to come down to is education of the market. And like to JP's earlier point, like you can actually generate model statistics and say this one is X% accurate for the positive and X% accurate for the negative. And here's how it works. And I think you're going to it'll be actually quite easy to separate the wheat from the chaff, the kind of the companies that are actually applying it and the companies that are just talking about it by educating the market on what to actually look for and how they're using it.
Right.
And I think that's like in a lot of ways we want the market to be really hyped on sort of the application of AI and the integration of AI into the mineral exploration space. I think it's a great thing, and I think it's going to add just a whole nother level of accountability because I also think like the non-sexy way to think about AI, it's a bit of an audit. You bring it in and you're able to look at things like we all know about sort of the companies that are promoting the thing that's been there forever and ever. And it's sort of like we've got this massive big drill hole and kind of it's just the same thing has been drilled kind of like Swiss cheese every kind of 3 or 4 meters. That's one example of if you look at how we present information with an AI, it's all about showing where do you have high potential targets that are a distance away from positive learning points, a learning point being an assay. So visually right away, kind of if I see a really high potential target that's sitting with 50 drill hole big bright green learning points right below it, that's not something I get excited about. It's the thing that's been trained on that learning point, but it's say 500 meters away is all of a sudden something that looks super interesting. So just as one example, I think you're going to find yourself as we educate the market, and we're going to do everything we can to create Verify as a standard within this space, that it's going to be a bit of a self-regulating environment, and that a lot of that kind of the ways that things have been historically promoted are going to be a lot harder because you've got AI, which is an unbiased look at your project telling you what the potential is.
And then it also depends, I suppose, on the different AI models, because it's actually not something that I've tracked necessarily very closely, but off the top of my head, I don't know that many AI companies that are targeting mineral exploration to begin with. How long before we have this data? Like how long before we know which model works and which model doesn't?
Well, you get it for your project. So locally, you know how well it works at prediction. So you'll see it through, so we apply sort of the best practices. So we always keep a validation set out of your training and all of that. So you can see how well it performs locally on your deposit. You'll see it visually where like it highlights new areas or not, which has been somewhat interesting with some of our clients actually. They've been able to say, well, we'll shift the focus just because where we thought there would be something, there's not really interesting patterns showing up. So we'll just shift our focus and exploring elsewhere. And then I think on the bigger scale, it's going to be through, yeah, just exploration successes and how people adopt it in their daily life. And for me, that's a bigger thing than actually finding new mineral deposit would be just to have people use these types of sort of data-driven analytic tools on their daily sort of job and reporting stuff as sort of a metric-driven result. So right now, like if you look at somebody trying to promote exploration targets, most of the time it's a circle and a map. And it's only backed up by the geoscience team that came up with that circle, right? So it's really hard to communicate to somebody who doesn't understand the industry. Whereas if we start communicating into probabilities, what is the average risk for that target, and to really start putting numbers around these things, for me, that's the ultimate measure of success, to be honest. Set aside the accuracy of models and stuff like that, we can always tweak those. But if people start using sort of metric-driven approaches to make decisions, that's going to be a big change in the industry.
I want to talk about what's worked and what's not worked and what deposits or what type of targets it works on most of the times. But just before we get into that, the culture fit thing that I wrote down earlier is also interesting to me. Is it a good culture fit though, mining and AI? Because we kind of seem like a dinosaur sector, if you will. I mean, I started going to conferences last year, and I've been continually impressed by the average age of the people at those conferences, which is to say that it's not very low. And so those are not the people who grew up with computers and the internet and everything else.
No, I like naturally it's not a culture fit, to be honest. If you were to just compare it to another sector where it's much younger generation or people that were born using computers, it's totally different. We're facing different challenges into the adoption. But again, we've been really surprised. So it's not a natural thing. We often walk into a room for, let's say, like a sales pitch or just a technical discussion with companies. And you'll see that half of the people there are sort of doubters. They took the meeting because they're sort of intrigued by it, or they want to even try to destroy your thesis, right? They're just like, well, we'll get the meeting and then we'll tell them that it doesn't work or something like that. But it's again, and when I joined Vrify, it was really important for me that we kept it as technical as possible and sort of rooted in things people understand. And we've been able to convert, I want to say like 90% of the people we've talked to. And that just goes through like discussing how it works, being super honest about how it works, and sort of not being a black box where you're like, give us your data, you'll get target, and this is off. Like people actually get to use it and interact with a tool. But also when they look at the result and they can relate to how they've been exploring and how they've been making their decision, that's where we change sort of their opinion right off the bat. Like we have really good examples of like, don't want to be sort of putting age things into it, but older geos that were doubters when we started. They even so the contract was even sort of signed, and it was still doubting it. And through the different meetings, through the different iteration we ran with the model, they are now some of our biggest champions. So that's been really, really fun to see for sure.
And I think such a big part of that is everything we do is very much rooted in geoscience. So it's not like, hey, we've got a degree in whatever's kind of machine learning or whatever it is. It's very much just approaching it from a place of like, here is everything that we and our team know about geoscience, which goes back to fundamentally like the steps that you have to take to prepare the data to run your AI model, you would not be able to do unless you had a deep understanding of what is the relationship between mag geophysics and fault structures and linear density maps and so on. So even the preparation of the data and for such a big part of it is that's almost like when we go through this process that JP's, and I would honestly say it's 95% and like conversion rate. Um, it's when you go through that process, by the time you get to now, let's talk about how we're going to use AI to take this big data set. Everyone's kind of at that point is already understanding, oh, wow, this is actually completely rooted in geoscience. This is not like ChatGPT trying to find a home in the sector. I think, but going back to the culture side, I think actually the counter argument to that is it's also the biggest opportunity. So first off, this mining in for two reasons. The variability we see in geology compared to other sectors, like if you look at oil and gas, they've been doing a lot of this stuff for years, but it's because you'll have 40 companies drilling $10 million holes all in the same basin that has almost identical geology right across the basin. Where in mining, you're kind of two deposits 20 meters apart from each other have three different mineral system models that can be applied to them. So the variability has always made it really difficult because there's not like big consistent data sets that we can all pool together to understand. But also, one of the reasons that I think this intersection of mineral exploration and AI has attracted so much recent attention from non-traditional investors, it's not just because critical minerals are getting their time in the sun. A lot of it is because that capital looks at industries that have historically not done a good job in adopting technology, and those are the best ones for adopting technology because that's where the most opportunity sits. So it's we're almost like we look at this sector and you hear things like, oh, first to be second. We like to kind of wait until things are proven before we test them and so on. And because of that culture that's been in our industry for years and years, it's actually set us up so well to make the most of it because the opportunity is that much bigger if this stuff is effectively applied, which we believe it can be. And I think that's where you're actually getting like there's a lot of investors right now that are completely industry agnostic. They're just saying, what sector can I invest in that is going to be disrupted by AI, and how do I ride that disruption wave? And I think there's no better positioned industry than mining and mineral exploration for that.
I saw in that piece that you wrote at the end of 2023 that you mentioned that first to be second mentality, and that hit home for me bigly because it happened to me too. Like I've almost always done long format interviews, and at first it was hard to get people to sit down with me for 90 minutes. They're like, what, 90? I can give you 15 if you want, or 20 max, but I don't want to do that. And then over time companies started doing that, and sometimes it's multi-billion-dollar companies sitting down with me for 2 hours, and they're like, oh, if next gen's doing it, and I'm a small uranium explorer, might as well do it as well. But so it's that same mentality, first to be second, right? So and then I do a next gen interview, and then I have the morning after I have 10 messages in my inbox saying like, hey, I want to do that long format podcast.
Yeah.
So that's really, it really describes the industry perfectly.
And you need those leaders, and like JP's been one in the sector for as a geologist for 10 years and looking at this. You need those people to really stand out and say like, I'm going to give this a shot, because otherwise if we're all it's pretty obvious if every single person is waiting kind of to be second, then we end up in a lot of ways where the industry has been. So you need those leaders to stand up and say, we'll take a shot with this.
But JP, you actually said that you didn't want to necessarily throw ages out there. I'd actually be interested in knowing, if you feel comfortable sharing it, but knowing what kind of the average age is of your user, because one of the people you're describing there is, I think, someone who we both know. I spoke to Dustin Perry of Kingfisher Metals. They're, here disclaimer, non-confession, they're a client of mine, and he used to be skeptical about AI, and I think he's using it right now. But again, he's on the way younger spectrum of the side of geologists. So what's the average age of the user for you?
I think it varies quite a bit. It really depends on the company. I would say we're sort of going from, I want to say 30 years old to 65. And yeah, the 65-year-old that's been my most interesting discussions, to be honest, just because they went from geology being draw with crayons on a map. This is how I studied too. Right? When I did my undergrad, we still had to color in maps and like go into the field, pick up rocks, draw points, and then like draw those beautiful sort of artistic map. And to them, and one thing they've been saying is like geology is half art, half science. And for me, that sort of resonates kind of weird because if you talk to a physicist right now, they'll never say that physics is just half science. Like it's science, right?
Sure.
However, if you spoke to a physicist in the Renaissance age, it was half art, half science, right? Science, I think, evolves through different phases, and I think like in geology right now, we're at basically the change point between being sort of art, sort of biasly driven to be more scientifically driven in terms of how we search for mineral deposit and how like we apply science to find and make discoveries. So that's been really interesting to have those discussions with these people because they've seen like the whole industry shift from crayons to computers to now AI. So whereas a 20-year-old or somebody who's just starting their career, for them, it's a given, right? Computers are there. I'll do 3D models right off the bat. I'll use AI if I can. So yeah, it's been interesting for sure. But yeah, in terms of the age, it's sort of same strata as the industry, to be honest. We're not seeing like only young geos or only young CEOs adopting the technology. We're also seeing sort of it across the different age gaps that we're seeing.
And yeah, I think it starts from a place of almost curiosity. And like it's the scientist that's curious about sort of the application. It's not even from a place so much of like solving the problem of like I need more targets or I need to improve discovery rates. That's sort of the underlying problem that everyone's trying to solve, but everyone's just curious. If you're in this industry and you spent your whole career trying to find something, like you're quite curious if there's someone who's claiming to have a new technology that can help you do that. And we keep saying like it doesn't AI should not be a black box in mineral exploration, and it's so important because we can't really feed that curiosity if we're not showing you what it's seeing and how it's working and how you can take that and then apply it to your own geoscience or whether it's geology or geophysics background. Dustin's a good example. Like Dustin is, I don't know how Dustin is, probably 40 years old or so. But a geologist who's a CEO of a company, earlier stage exploration. And there's a bit of a tendency out there to think that this stuff can only be applied to like pre-existing mines where there's a ton of data. Whereas what we're seeing is sort of it's higher risk, higher reward. That's how earlier stage exploration works, but it doesn't take a lot of data to be able to start to paint an AI picture of what your kind of deposit potential or mineral potential looks like. The work we've done with Kingfisher, JP, you're welcome to pull it up. I'm sure
Yeah, I'll add to
it's a
your
cool
point
example.
though. Yeah, first,
But yeah, sorry, the last thing I'll say on that is just like whether it's greenfields, brownfields, kind of expansion of a known deposit, whatever it is, there's an AI, not screen, but there's AI information, AI driven information or insight that you're going to find in every single step along the way.
yeah. And to your point, in terms of the data, like people always say like you need big data to run AI. You need a lot of data. When you actually look at it, what needs a lot of data is the training of the models. But running inference or making predictions, you don't need a whole lot of data. And again, that is taking you back to all of the um, language models we're using right now. They're not like when you're like asking a prompt or asking a question to ChatGPT, you're not inputting a whole lot of data besides text. The amount of data that's really important and where you need big data is to train the model in the back end that's actually generating you an answer. And this is something we were solving for at Verify that sort of we're doing different than other companies, is that we're aggregating a lot of data sets together to train our models. So your model isn't just trained on your property. If you're exploring for copper, it's trained on all of the copper projects or porphyry copper projects that we have in our database. So that includes publicly available data set, but it also includes some proprietary information from other clients, right? Nobody's seeing everyone's data, but they're gaining. So what we're doing is basically we're making gains into aggregating a lot of data to sort of be more accurate in making those predictions. And this is actually becoming big data as compared to if you're just training a model on your local ground.
And I'll add to that, it's fully anonymized in that sort of any geographical coordinates and so on are removed. So if we work with you and your neighbor, the model doesn't actually know these two things are beside each other. All it knows is that if, say, those are both copper porphyries, it got really good at building the relationship between the exploration data sets, like the geophysics and the geochemistry and the known learning points. And it got better and better at kind of building that correlation. And it's going to use all the learnings and the learnings from all the other copper porphyries it worked on and then apply it. So even if you come into it and say, I've only got 2 drill holes and some mag, it gets to take all of that learning and say, well, I'm really good at determining sort of between mag and or gravity or whatever it is. And your isolated learning points at where we should go next. And where we should go next might not be, here's a big target to drill. Where we should go next might be, here's a data set, a type of data that works really well at identifying in this type of environment, like IP or whatever it is. The next step might be, you should go do some IP over here because we have a bit of a vacuum of data in this area.
I actually have a question about that too, which because I thought that might be a business avenue for you as well. We'll get to that, but to your point, JP, isn't a model basically as good as the data you feed? I mean, kind of like a calculator knows what a 2 plus 2 multiplied by 2 is, but if you put the parentheses in a different spot, then it's 8 and no longer 6, right? Or if you put a 20 instead of a 2 because you missed on the 0 or whatever, then you get a different answer altogether. But so the question here is, how can AI deal with that incomplete or inconsistent kind of legacy data, which is often more noise than signal?
Yeah, it's really interesting because right now the architecture we're using is really good at making the difference between noise and signal, and we've tested it in sort of geophysics heavy data set where there's a lot of noise sometimes in those data set. We see that the algorithm is actually able to make the difference between sort of the signal and the noise in the data. The other thing is we have a really strong geoscientific team in the background that's cleaning up the data, normalizing it, making sure that it's the best quality possible to be used for predictions for the client themselves. But when we train, and the training of the model is still done in the background, just like, again, I'll go back to OpenAI, but when you prompt your model, you're not training it, you're just running inference. And it's the same for us, right? So the model is trained by us. So we make sure that we make educated guesses, or not guesses, but an educated decision on the data we're feeding it to train the overarching models, the general models. So these data sets, we make sure that they're curated, they're really good, that we're making sort of solid geoscientific decision into how we're setting up the learning space and whatnot. So by doing that, we're ensuring that the models we're building are accurate as possible and sort of as good as possible in making prediction. But we're also ensuring that they're not generating too much hallucination. They're not learning the data instead of learning correlation. So that's all sort of part of our R&D and really strong R&D and scientific team in the background as well, just to make sure that all these things are checked. So we're coming at it like super scientifically, to be honest. It has to be just because we're trying to scale something and have people sort of use the tool.
And it's what JP is referring to, just on top of that, is we can track that. So right now we have 9 different models. We have a VMS model, a copper porphyry model, an orogenic gold model, an epithermal gold, and there's even some submodels beyond that. So when we take your data set, the geoscience team goes through, takes that data set, cleans it up. We'll create second and third order data sets where we have a series of algorithms that can be applied. So we can take your mag data and create sort of a liniment density map and sort of other data sets on top of it. We can correlate data sets where if we have a gap in the geophysics, we can see what other types of geophysics are there and correlate it to create sort of a generative geophysics map for that area. It's not as accurate as actually doing the geophysics, but it's enough to work with. But then the next step is, when you're selecting your model, you could choose the master model, which is every single data piece we have, the mineral system model, which might be a copper porphyry model, or the no model, which is just going to take your data set and spin up a new model and train it. And when you train it on, or when you look at all 3, it's the difference between the predictions is where the sweet spot almost is, because you're kind of seeing, like, it's a copper porphyry system, but maybe there's some other mineral events taking place. I don't want to overly bias. So let's take the master model and just see if there's something else taking place within that might not show up if I just use the copper porphyry model. So it's an interesting exercise to go through, and it's why it's so important to run different iterations. But then the other side of it is what we're seeing, and we track it, is every time we add another company deposit, and usually we bring in a whole bunch of public data as well, you're seeing the accuracy of the models. And we can test the accuracy by taking out data, making predictions, and reinserting drill holes to see if that prediction worked. We're seeing that accuracy improve. And that's really exciting, because that ultimately is how we build our business, is by having kind of the world's best, most accurate models at predicting mineralization.
It's where I was thinking about is exactly training your AI as well. And I guess you can really only train it on known economic deposits, right? You can find VMSs that work and porphyries that work and whatever else it might be. But wouldn't that just teach it to look for what we already know, and therefore kind of limit the potential for new breakthrough discoveries, if you will?
Yeah, this is one of the limit of the current model that we have. Basically, it's trained to find types of deposit and types of the data set we already know exist, basically. So there are mineral systems that people have been exploring for a long time. So it'd be hard to have like a really novel type of copper deposit associated to a rock type that nobody thought about, right? So that's obviously that's a limitation, but we're strong believers that there's a lot of deposits that are still hiding in plain sight, right? One narrative that I really don't like in the industry is whenever people show up with that slide that says that deposits discovery are sort of getting deeper and deeper, and you have to go deeper to find a new deposit. That slide is never put into context with the price of metals. And I think if you just made a correlation between the price of metals and the depth at which these deposits are mined, it's just a one-to-one correlation. So basically, you can mine deep deposits now just because the metal price makes it worth it. Whereas before, if gold was at $400, there's no way you're mining gold all the way to 2 kilometers down, right? Because the costs increase as well. So there's sort of fallacy in that argument that we have to look deeper into newer places to find deposits right now. I think there's still a lot of deposits that are hiding in plain sight. And Steve has a great story around sort of finding a deposit hiding in a shadow of a head frame. Uh, but I'm sure it's not the only one, right? We've overlooked areas, and we see that with our clients. Like clients have like some of the targets they get, sometimes they're like, oh, that's an area that was interesting in the 70s. We just forgot about it. Like the knowledge got lost, somebody moved out, they found a deposit near it that was sort of outcropping. So obviously they're drawn to this area, but this sort of makes them forget about another area that was their initial target when they showed up in the 70s, right? So these things exist, and there's a lot more efficiency. It's a lot less disturbance to the environment if you're going to mine near an existing head frame, as opposed to go into a brand new virgin territory to sort of cut down all the trees or run geophysics lines and stuff like that. Yeah.
And JP is referring to like in Quebec. So prior to Verify, and actually where Verify initially started was used to be the CEO of Integra Gold. We made a big discovery sitting 2 kilometers from two of Canada's largest gold mines, the Lamaque mine and the Sigma mine, which were Teck and Placer Dome operated for 50 and 70 years. And the high grade triangle deposit, which is going to now produce 200,000 ounces this year for Eldorado Gold, was just sitting under a swamp. And it came to surface. Mineralization started at 50 meters below surface. It's higher grade, and it looks like it's probably going to be bigger than either the Sigma or the Lamaque mines. And it's such an interesting one in that, to JP's point, near mine discoveries are way less impactful because you get to leverage tailings and waste rock and infrastructure and things like that. Not to say that grassroots discoveries aren't important, but it's a perfect example of like the concept that we have, like to make the statement that all of the easy ones have been found and that we have to go deeper is you're fundamentally saying, as we have done an absolute perfect job of looking at every single piece of data that exists in this industry and extrapolated every single little bit of mineral potential knowledge out of that data. And like that statement is just fundamentally not true. We have not done that as an industry. And even if we had done that 5 years ago, technology has unlocked a whole new way to look at data. So if you fundamentally don't believe in the statement that we've looked at every piece of data that exists in the industry today, which we have not done, then we need to kind of change this narrative that we need to drill 4,000 meters deep and we need to change our technology to go after these deep things. And we need to just take another look at the data sets that we have today, because kind of the reality is, and investors and companies should get excited about it, near surface discoveries are the best. They're cheaper, they're more economic, they're often sitting next to existing infrastructure. Those are the ones that yeah, we should be taking a very close look at.
I think there's plenty. There's an example even very recent. It was in BC, close to surface, new porphyry. All of a sudden, we're talking about a flat-lying porphyry and stuff like that we've missed. So I totally agree on that part. Although I am biased because I'm mostly a pre-discovery speculator myself. So if all the easy ones have been found, then I really don't have a chance, and I would not like to believe that's true. So is there a specific deposit where your model works best? Like, is it particularly good at finding porphyries or something, or SEDEX or VMS, whatever?
Right now, so when we initially set up a year ago, the big discussion was around exactly that thing where like VMS porphyries, they have a big footprint. They alter a lot of rock volume. So ultimately, they're sort of easier to find because you see a big alteration halo. So you can see them from space, well, not from space, but from up quite a bit. Whereas something like a gold system has a very limited footprint that's normally associated to a few centimeters, maybe a meter off of the gold vein, which is normally just a meter or 3 meters across, right? So they're harder to spot in terms of the volume of rock they affect. So when we started, we initially signed on Southern Cross Gold, which is one of our early adopters, with the intention of proving that we are actually able to make predictions in these types of complicated environment. We also signed up pegmatite lithium one. We signed up copper porphyry one as well. And the goal was to see how like our architecture and our modeling sort of assumption would work in those three environments. And it turns out that they work great for all three of them. So for gold deposit, one thing that we see now is we're able to map out ore shoots really well, almost vertically. We're sort of limited to like pure vertical world right now, but we do map out the ore shoots quite often really accurately. So that's been interesting. It's been a success with Southern Cross as well as identifying a second ore shoot right off of their drilled out main deposits there. So it seems to work in all of the environment we've thrown at it. Obviously, you need the data to support the decision and sort of to train the model. And so far, yeah, we haven't encountered an environment where we're not able to train a model that's going to do an effective job at making a prediction of what we know. And that's always our first thing is like you want to find what's already been found. So if it doesn't work, then that's your first issue. But then by doing what people call back testing or what we call validation, where we remove some of the data while we train the algorithm and then basically compare the results to the predictions, we've been really surprised. Like the accuracy is rarely under 80%, which is really good for our types of data. Obviously, we're not trying it to, you can't make it 100% because then you're sort of overfitting your model and it's sort of worthless. It's not helping you find things you don't know. But we've been really surprised at the accuracy that's like systematically coming off of those predictions.
And I think one of the other elements we're seeing is as we work with more, kind of the easy thing to point at is, well, your model is trained on more data, so your model is obviously naturally going to get better. But if you look at like we have someone on JP's team who spent 15 years at Tech Resources, primarily dealing with copper porphyries. And if we look at the work that Kevin and his team have done, dealing with sort of the results from this AI work that we're doing with these companies going after target porphyry, the embedded knowledge that's coming from that and how you interpret the results and how a geologist digests it and so on. It's like this new AI trained geologist skill set is starting to show up, and it's actually super valuable. So when we look at, are we better at predicting this type versus this type, there is an element of, well, we've worked on 10 orogenic gold systems, and our technical team that's worked on those 10 orogenic gold systems is actually really good at not just because the model is better, but in helping you interpret the results that the model is showing you, how we can modify that to build your exploration plan going forward. And like I think it was a geologist that told me the story. I've always liked the story of the two geologists that run into the grizzly bear. And one geologist starts tying his shoes, and the geologist is saying, "What are you doing? You cannot run a grizzly bear." And he's like, "I don't have to. I just have to outrun you." And that's kind of like the geologist that can use AI effectively, like going back to the earlier conversation about sort of whether AI is going to displace jobs and so on. Whether or not the geologist that doesn't embrace AI has a job or not in the future, I think they always will. There's always a component to what this is, but the geologist that really understands how to make the most out of these AI tools like Verify and others, I think are going to be kind of leaps and bounds and a lot further ahead um, in how they explore and what they're able to achieve. And I sat on a panel for a bunch of students recently looking mining engineering and geology students, and it was sort of the one piece of advice I gave is like do everything you possibly can to educate yourself on AI so you can go into every job interview as you come out of school and say, kind of, here is how AI could be applied to this field, because I guarantee the companies you're meeting with are going to be slow to adopt, and you just need to know a little bit more than the person interviewing you, and you'll probably get the job.
Hmm. That's how I fool the audience into thinking that I know what I'm talking about. I look for
Yeah,
audiences that don't know what I'm talking
yeah.
about, and I pretend.
I've made a career of it.
I want to look into some examples. JP, you said you have something there to pull up, but just before we get into that, Steve, you mentioned a couple of minutes ago that this year specifically there's going to be a bunch of your AI targets drilled by companies. Who's drilling what's interesting to look at? What should I put on my watch list?
So we were actually just going through this list yesterday. So at Verify, we have about 30 companies using this AI technology now. We'll publish that list soon on our website. Some are quite quiet about it. They just want to kind of go deep technical and they'll come out down the road. Some are louder. I think drilling right now, Rua Gold is drill testing targets, or I think actually as we speak, they're testing those targets. Cantera Minerals, copper targets in Newfoundland near term. Kingfisher, which I think JP is going to show as well. They're ramping up for a summer exploration program as well. I think Caliber Mining is moving towards testing some targets. And what's fascinating, I should say, about these targets, some of these targets are verified generated targets. Some of them are company targets that also showed up through the program. And like there's a bit of a what's the value of the AI if it's showing me what I already know? Where the reality is that means it actually works. And if it can generate a target in 20 minutes that took sort of years of geological understanding to come up with, it means what it kind of does is validate all of the other targets it generates as well. So some of the targets I'm mentioning, some of them are pure verified targets. Other ones are sort of, I would say, verified, validated targets that pre-existed as well. There's a couple more. I'm probably forgetting them. JP might have a few others as well.
I think that's a good thing. Well, that like together with I guess the announcement or our case study for Southern Cross, I think that's a
Yeah.
good
That's actually
forward
something I
Yeah.
also want to
horizon.
look into. Maybe you can show
Yeah.
me an example of where it already worked. Like, what's something, maybe DORA found something a human geo missed and it actually changed the drill plan or something and then resulted in discovery. Do you have an example that you can walk me through?
In terms, yeah, we can walk you through, I guess the Sound and Cross again is one we will pull up because it's been so
Well, why don't
successful.
we show the
Otherwise,
Kingfisher?
Cantera
Why,
or
why
yeah,
don't we show
Kingfisher as well.
the Kingfish one? Or the Cantera is actually a great example as well for that, where it's kind of to JP's earlier comment about we looked at this in the 70s, but then sort of something else was discovered that took all the attention away. Cantera is a great example of that, where when they looked back and they saw the target that Verify generated, they said, "Oh, actually, you know what? This does show up in historic assessment reports, and there's so many other targets and so many other things going on, but this thing lit up like a Christmas tree." With a very similar signature to the existing deposit, and it wasn't in the near-term priorities. What's fascinating though is when you look at why it lit up, and you look at the data that we had on the deposit that they have nearby, one of the things that showed up is IP was a very, very good, correlated very well with the known deposit, and there was no IP over this area. So we naturally think we just need drill targets to go get exciting drill results to go test. The next step in this case was actually to go run IP over the deposit first, see what then the signature looks like, and then make a decision on whether or not drilling. So we always like to make the point. It's not just about just kind of give me the biggest, juiciest target I can drill a hole into and announce. It's really about looking at your entire exploration program and every dollar you spend on every type of exploration tool that you're using and seeing how that might, from what you know about the AI machine learning signature of what you already know, how can those other tools help you get the most out of new data sets that you're bringing in?
Yeah, let's look at the example, JP, that you have there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, share my screen real quick.
No, sorry. All I was going to say is what JP's going to show you here is actually, so this is the tool that we put into the hands of the geologists so they can use themselves, but we also train them and use it ourselves. So all the work that we're thewe're using our own software that we built ourselves and then putting this power of this tool into the hands of the technical teams.
There's like, this is not available to, this is just available to you and your team, essentially, in their technical team. There's nothing that I could use as an investor, right? If I get that correctly. Well, besides looking at it if the company publishes.
No, we get asked that a lot though. So it's sitting on our whiteboard right now is so one of the things that we actually just came up with is what if a technical team wants to share the results of this with their CEO, their non-technical CEO, they can share it. And in the discussion, actually, JP and I were having this discussion yesterday, is what if they want to share that with an investor? So maybe you can't go through and play with the model and like modify the inputs and so on, but you can actually just use it, interact with it in sort of a view only mode. So it is something that we're going to look at. But you tell us after JP walks us through, it'd be valuable if a company sent you a link to something like this.
Sure. Let's see.
Yeah, so yeah, I guess this is a platform you're seeing right now. So it always starts with I guess the ground around which you want to run predictions. So we go and get the DEM and the satellite imagery. Everything is run off of the cloud and it runs in a browser. So I don't need to install anything locally to sort of get the software going or anything, right? I just log into this web page and everything is self-contained in there. So you don't need a lot of RAM. You don't need a really big GPU computer. We've taken care of that for you. It runs on an iPad as well. So like sometimes we'll be sitting down in my couch watching TV and running models at the same time. So that's pretty awesome for sure. So yeah, and then we see it as a sandbox. So the way we've designed it is there's a workflow approach to it. So on the left here, you have all the different steps you need to run and generate targets. So you have to walk down the different steps one at a time. And then once you do that, you get to the results. It's easy to go back and sort of modify one of your decisions according to your results. So the first thing you need to do is go and sort of select the area of interest. These area of interest you can have as many as you want, but this would be the one I have for this project here. So you see it here being displayed. So if I zoom into that area, you see that I'm trying to generate a model for an area that's or about 5 kilometers by 5 kilometers. If I zoom in to each individual pixels here, you see that I have pixels here on the ground. These pixels for this would be 5 meters by 5 meters. So I'm generating predictions as a 5-meter resolution out of the data that I'm ingesting here. So once you've decided on that, then you have to go through 4 different steps. The first one would be to choose of all of the data that's available in the database for your project, and that's sort of either your data or public data set. You get to choose which one you want to use, so we can sort of ingest as much data as possible, or as you want in there. Sometimes you have 200 different layers, and then you get to choose which one you want to use as part of that predictive exercise. So yeah, you see that if my data is ticked, that means I'm using it to run a prediction. If it's not checked, then that means I'm not using it. So you can view your data, sort of see. Sorry, go ahead, Saif.
Well, yeah, one thing on that here, I keep coming back to your question is like, how does somebody know if a company's actually using AI or how they're using AI? I think what's really important to understand about this is we're data agnostic, like every type of geophysics, geochemistry, and so on. And from what we've seen, the bulk of hey, we used AI to drill this hole, and from other groups out there, it's primarily like we used AI for this specific type of geophysics, or we used AI for this specific type of data, whether it's some new type of geophysical data or reprocessing of geochemical data or whatever it is. And the way this platform is, we're downstream of all that. So whatever data a company has, whether it's satellite data, geochemistry data, geophysical data, hydrology data, sometimes people have these random data sets for some type of data that was collected on their project that's not typically used in exploration. We don't care. We can use it all.
Yeah. Yeah, as Steve said, so we're data agnostic, but also scale agnostic. So you could have an AOI, in my case here, it's 5K by 5K, but I could have one that's 300 kilometers by 300 kilometers and it still works, right? As long as you have data coverage for that area. Yeah, so once you've decided which expression layers you want to use, you can then sort of run through how you want to train and what commodity you want to train your model on. So here you're seeing that I'm training it using copper or gold. So any gold or copper intercepts in my drill holes are now displayed here, and they're now basically classified between being mineralized or unmineralized. So your green points would be all of the mineralized samples I have in my drill hole database, and the red ones would be all of the areas that I've drilled or explored that are not mineralized. And this is what the algorithm is trained to sort of predict. Um, we then have the step where you'll choose which commodity pre-trained model you want to use. And for example, here we're exploring for porphyry, so we're using the porphyry model. This one is the one trained on 20,000 images. And then you run through the predictive model construction where you sort of can play with some of the parameters to make sure that you're generating a model that's accurate or that makes a lot more sense or that's using the right parameters for your predictions. In the end, what you
And
get as an output.
sorry, one step on that one you just showed, JP, on the build predictive model. There's two, there's a box right at the bottom where it says predict depth. And what that is there's two ways to predict it. First is like a 2D, think of a heat map that's at surface. So it's a 2D projection where you'd have this is a target, this is a target. And then because there's drill data, and we have some of the learning points at depth, we actually have a series of ways to predict that to the actual depth of that as well. Because knowing that there's a mineral point below me is not nearly as valuable as knowing it's 20 meters below or 1,000 meters below.
Hmm. That's actually a very good point. I'm sure there's a mineral point below me right now, but it could be 10 kilometers deep.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, so this is the output of the predictive model. So you get the grid, all of the pixels that I showed you earlier get a value in terms of the prediction. So the value is between 0 and 1. And that relates to probability of finding mineralization. So if I look at these value here, you see that they're around 0.02. So there's not a whole lot of chances to finding a mineral deposit there. Whereas if I go here and over, you see that here we're at 0.96. So for the training data that I gave it, basically copper or gold above these threshold, there's around 96% chances that I'll find something there. So that's really, really sort of high probability. So what you can
That's how
do
you get a
then, you can
grade.
threshold.
I'm sorry for interrupting. Doesn't predict grade
Yeah.
though, if I understand correctly.
No, it predicts above the grade you've set, essentially. So I know that this
So,
point is either copper above 1,000 ppm or gold above 0.1 gram per ton.
Mm.
That's what I know about this
so
prediction.
that, but this goes back to that iterative process. You could run a second model at 2,000 copper and a third model at 3,000 ppm copper, and all of a sudden, the variance that you see in the predictive model, if something shows up in one and doesn't show up in the other, you now have a grade bucket that it's predicting it sits in as well. So there is a way through this process to generate sort of an understanding of grade as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you can threshold that score and see what sort of is left once you remove the low probability area, and these becomes your expression target. So you can see that you're doing a good job at finding things that have been drilled out, which is your first validation tool. But then what becomes interesting is if you're good at finding things that have been drilled off, then areas like this one where you have a few samples but not a whole lot, really high probability, not a whole lot of drilling, this becomes interesting. And then there's other areas that are being highlighted here that have zero work done on them. And this again becomes even more interesting because then you can see, well, if I'm predicting these things accurately that I've drilled that I know exist, that puts some importance to these areas that are sort of brand new, sort of novel exploration targets.
And
As part of the
the
output
model
as
has,
well. Yeah.
sorry, one last part, JP. The model has a natural bias towards showing what you already know. So when the brightest targets have green around them, don't take it as we've drilled all the best spots already. That's because that's hopefully that means the model is actually working. So it's actually better to have something that's say a 40 or 50 or 60% chance of mineralization that's hundreds of meters away from a green dot, an assay, than it is to have sort of a whole bunch of green dots with a bright spot right above. So again, it's really understanding the relationship between your known learning points and these other targets. But the next step in this, if for a project like this, which is BC, as we move into the expiration season, for these other targets that sit further away, the first step is to send someone out there, put some boots on the ground and see what they actually like. What do these rocks actually look like where some of these other hotspots are showing up?
How cost effective is all of this, though? I mean, it looks interesting there, but is it, if I'm an exploration company, is it, I mean, is it, how much does it cost? I don't know if you share that or not because you're a private company, of course, but how much would it cost me to get that kind of modeling that you're showing me now?
So it's
It's about the cost of a drill hole, right? And then you get unlimited sort of modeling ability. So you basically take away one drill hole from your drill hole campaign, and then you're able to run as many iterations as you want.
So what's the business model for you right now? Like, is it subscription based, project based, on a
So
per case basis?
it's a subscription. It's an annual subscription for a year. Like typically it takes anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks to go through the data ingestion side. So we don't there's no extra fees for that. That's all just part of it. And then it's unlimited modeling. The way it's currently done, it's unlimited access to our team. So you have sort of the bench strength of this kind of the geoscience, geophysics team as well. But what we've kind of found is to be honest, like as you know, the market's quite like the profile of your client is quite different and highly variable. So we look at it as our business will be successful if we prove to the world that Verify can kind of make discoveries and show you things. So essentially, we'd sit down with companies who get really excited about it and want to use it. And we essentially just say, look, we're fortunate. We just closed our Series B financing. We're in a great position as a company. We'll find a way to work with the companies that the number one thing for us is that they actually want to go and drill test these targets. If a company comes into a meeting and says we're looking to drill these targets in the next couple months, then we'll find a way to work with them every time.
There's no investor element to it. Like, that you don't have a platform where I could just log in 50, $100 per month or whatever it might be, and then I use some of the tools.
Not yet, but you'll be the first beta tester as we figure out what that looks like.
I like how I self-invited there, but that's good.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, and I have it on camera, so I'll hold you to it. What
Yeah.
happens if what happens if DORA identifies a tier one target or whatever it might be, or a good target, and on a client's project, but that client doesn't like it. They don't want to drill it, so they're like, oh, we'll drill something else. But so they drill that else something else. It dusts. They walk away. What happens to that? Would you market that data yourself? Maybe try to pick up the project yourself or anything like that? Like, is there a monetization model for you there, or do you just leave it?
No, not for us. And like we're highly like the Verify platform, we work with almost 200 companies. Like data confidentiality is absolutely core to our business. So there's no scenario where if a company doesn't like a target, but it's on the ground or if it's something that kind of they did through their engagement with us, that we'd share that outside or action that separately. That being said, there's fundamentally something wrong if a big, massive, juicy target shows up and a client says, I'm not interested in that. I want to go drill what I already know over here. For us, it's really about sort of solving that problem. Is it from a lack of buy-in, a lack of understanding, a lack? What JP was just showing you is when you select a target, what it does is we generate an analysis of why is that a target. So here we break them up. It automatically separates into all these different targets. And if JP clicks on one of these, what you'll see is now you have a technical analysis of every data layer and why that target's important. So what it's saying is the first layers was represented 32% of the model weighting.
Hmm.
Blue is a low value. So a low value in this data layer drove the bulk or 32% of this model. And as you go through, like to go to the scenario that you described, if someone said that target makes no sense, they would have to pick apart the technical analysis layer by layer and say, there's no way this makes any sense, even though this thing has been trained on all of your company's data and a whole bunch of other data as well. But this is the part that we really find kind of gets the buy-in of the technical team because it's giving that insight into what is the AI actually seeing.
Right. When you look at what's that you're looking at right now, JP, by the way?
So here on the right,
Yeah.
so here these are all the input grids you selected as part of the input, right? So I can So I turn on, for example, this grid here, which is the IP grid that was fed into the model. And what I see from the SHAP overall model, this is the most important predictor, right? So I see that I'm looking for hard chargeability. And again, as a Porphyry explorer, I know that makes a lot of sense. So I'm happy with the model and the way it sees the data. And then I can go and look at that data set. And what I notice, like what we notice really quickly is there's not full coverage, right? So the IP survey doesn't extend all the way to the western part of the property. If I were to like make it transparent a bit, so you're seeing that it's the main driver. However, there are targets that aren't covered by the full coverage of the IP. And that could also sort of drive your exploration into what would be your next step of exploration, right? So these targets exist. Now, I know IP sort of predicts well in where I have IP. So maybe what I should do is extend that survey all the way here to sort of validate those targets, right? So it's also sort of really good decision making into what are your next exploration steps.
Right. So it does, okay. So it actually shows you where you can do other work as well, like you mentioned with the geophysics and everything. That's interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's essentially this year that we're gonna know way more about Verify. Like if we're talking in 6 to 8 months, 6 to 9 months from now, let's say we're talking Q4, we're gonna have a lot more examples of did it work? What's the ratio of hits to misses and stuff like that.
Yes, and you will have like Verify. I will, yeah, put my name behind it. Like 2025 will be the year of the AI discovery. And like there is no doubt in our minds that as we get more essentially shots on goal with more and more companies using the technology, that you're going to have not just one, you will have a series of AI-driven discoveries that take place across the industry this year.
Is that when you go to pitch these stories? I know you just did a Series B financing, I think, and it was a large private equity fund of New York coming into the story. Is that are you getting generalist tractions? Like, do you think this could kind of open the door to other investors to look into the mineral sector?
So it was for us, it was led by there are three investors in our Series B. It was led by a venture group out of New York. Um, Incredible guys, software, not mining, no experience in minerals, critical minerals, and so on. Experience in AI and just software in general. It was a fascinating discussion to go through. And again, I would put them in the mindset of not really stuck on any industry, just looking for opportunities where they see technology as disruptive to an industry. Um, I would say most software investors and technology investors like prefer vertically integrated software versus kind of finding the next Facebook or something or Twitter or whatever it is. It's something that can really go in and people who have deep domain experience can disrupt an industry. I think like they're an example of groups that are looking at sort of, I would say, mining adjacent, which is Verify because we're not actually mining things ourselves, that wouldn't have looked at it before. Uh, there is a much broader pool of capital that we're starting to see come into some of these AI-driven exploration stories and so on that are really, I think, are first going to invest in more of, again, the AI adjacent companies, which we're seeing. Like there's a bunch of them. There's a number of financings that just took place recently. Um, and what I don't know yet is will they invest directly into the junior? The theory is the first step is going to be into the junior that's actually embracing technology. It's not going to be just like the gold junior doing things the way they've always done it. But the one thing we have to keep in mind is mining compared to technology is one other sector. Like the amount of money we deal with is kind of infinitesimally small. It
Yeah.
is tiny compared to these other sectors where like the biggest problem we ran into when we did our Series B is the minimum investment a lot of these funds can make is like 25 to 50 million dollars. And for us, we weren't looking for that amount of capital at the time. Whereas like that's not a like that just doesn't happen almost in the mining sector. So whether or not all of that money piles right in and starts investing in juniors, I think there's probably a series of steps that happen before then, and we kind of work with our clients to really kind of solve what that might look like. Regardless, it doesn't take a lot. Like our sector and the amount of capital flowing into our sector is so small compared to other sectors that I think if this unlocks just a small percentage of that capital, yeah, I think it'll fundamentally change the sector as a whole.
I really hope you're right. And that's kind of a big thesis or hope that I have as well, that we'll see that coming in. I've not been too respectful of your time, and I do realize that I can keep asking questions forever because it's been very interesting to me. What am I forgetting to ask you, though, here at the end? What else should we be talking about?
Uh, I think for us that not we really touched on most of it. I think like we ultimately at Verify view success as our clients being successful. So what you're going to see from us and to keep an eye on is as other companies we work with start to have more success, we're going to do everything we can to kind of trumpet that success as well. And obviously, if they're successfully using our technology and saying positive things and championing it for us, we're going to see other clients from that. So no other questions, but I think what you'll see is we'll find a spot on our website and through our own communication to really call out the ones that are actively drilling and testing. Because what we want to do is create a bit of a community around these companies that are embracing this technology. So more just something to watch for. Otherwise, if anyone's actually interested in the technology, seeing what we do, always feel free to reach out through our site.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, JP. Anything you want to add here at the end?
No, I think that covers it pretty much. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's verify.ai. I'll put it up on the screen for people who want to see it. But this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much. Enjoy the
Thanks,
conversation.
Antonio.
And as always, thanks to everyone for watching Resource Talks. I have a couple of more things to say, though. The fact that this company was interviewed here today does not mean that they're necessarily a good or a bad company. I'm not here to endorse nor attack anyone. I am simply here to ask some questions. If you find that I have failed in asking a question that you would have liked to hear an answer to, which will happen as I'm not an experienced interviewer, please let me know, and I will try to correct that mistake in a future interview. As mentioned at the beginning, please understand that mineral exploration and development is an extremely risky business. Losing money is the norm and should be the expectation. This is a very complex sector, and the performance of individual companies typically depends on many different moving particles, including company-specific factors like geology, financing ability, and many others, really, as well as particles that are outside of the company's control, like geopolitics, macroeconomics, commodity prices, and many more, most of which are nearly impossible to fully understand. Moreover, these companies that typically get interviewed on Resource Talks are in the pre-revenue stage, which means they rely on the public markets for the financing of their operations, which could result in shareholder dilution. Furthermore, as a general rule of thumb, you'll be better off understanding that all company communications online, albeit this interview or their website and their presentation and their social media accounts, or even the social media accounts which you thought were your friends and then told you about a stock, everything really that these companies do is intended as marketing. And although I do not make buy or sell recommendations because there is a clear conflict of interest given the nature of my business, many out there do. And you should be aware of that inherent bias, and you should be careful out there. That bias is not always going to be clearly disclosed with everyone out there. So it is safer for you anytime you're watching any type of company-specific content to approach it with a dose of skepticism and assume that the party telling you about it is biased in at least some shape or form, because there will always be a bias. Again, albeit clear or not. So always ask yourself what the incentive of your counterparty is and never rely on them regardless of their incentives, but instead double check if what they're saying is true, again, by using setterplus.ca. The fact that I have no idea what I'm doing should already be clear to you at this point. I am not saying this to make jokes or laugh with myself. I just simply do not have a long enough track record of consistent investment profits. So I should under no circumstances be considered an authority on anything. Again, although this may sound amusing to you, believe me, it is not amusing, and it is not intended as a joke. I'm simply pointing out a fact and warning you not to rely on anything I do or say. Unfortunately, at least to my understanding, nobody out there has any special abilities. The CEOs do not possess any superior knowledge, and they cannot know about what will go up, what will go down, or what will go in circles. Some people even believe that to be rule number one on Wall Street. Nobody really knows. None of us know whether any of the company's activities will result in a success, again, given that we're talking about high-risk activities where most of the times it ends in failure. Also, unfortunately, try as I may, I won't always catch all red flags or all challenges with the companies. So even if I did ask a few tough questions in here, don't rely on this being all of the tough questions. Again, these are complicated startups with many moving parts, and I am conflicted given the nature of this business. Therefore, I cannot guarantee the quality of anything presented in this video, and you cannot hold me responsible for any losses or damages stemming from the way you decide to use this interview. Viewers, listeners, and readers acknowledge and agree that the information presented herein did not constitute a solicitation or an offer to buy or sell any security or investment or to participate in any trading strategy. Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business strictly disclaim any and all liability for losses and or damages, whether direct, indirect, special, or consequential, or other consequences, however so caused, arising out of any use or reproduction of the content published by Resource Talks or any decision made or action taken in reliance upon it. By consuming this content, all consumers vow to release Resource Talks and all parties involved in the management of the business from all claims, proceedings, or consequences. This is all to say, I know it's a lot of lawyer talk, but this is all to say that you shouldn't blindly trust me or anybody on the internet, and you should do your own research. Once again, social media is meant for entertainment. It is setterplus.ca where you do your research. That's where you'll find the company's official filings, and I encourage you to read and analyze the Management Information Circular, the financial statements, the Management Discussion and Analysis, and whenever available, the NI 43-101 technical documents. If you don't understand everything in those documents, the chances of you losing money are even higher than they normally are in this space. And as mentioned earlier, the chances of even the best analysts in this sector losing money are extremely high, since this is venture capital and it is not for everybody. I'll leave you with one of Charlie Munger's quotes, which I wish I had listened to more often earlier on, which says, quote, "If you don't understand it, don't do it."